Hello everyone and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Tom Halleck. This week we are just about 3 weeks away from the midterm elections. There is a record number of women running for the House of Representatives and Senate this year, including here in northern New York, where for the first time all three of the candidates running for the 21st District House seat are women. Democrat Tedra Cobb and Green Party candidate Lynn Kahn are both challenging the Republican incumbent Elise Stefanik, who made history by becoming the youngest woman ever elected to Congress at the age of 30 back in 2014. Now, this fall, she's seeking a third term. Leading up to Election Day, we will be hosting a debate among all three of the candidates coming up in 2 weeks. And we've asked the candidates to sit down with us for profiles to help voters heading to the polls on November 6th. We have been joined in recent weeks by both challengers, Tedra Cobb and Lynn Kahn. You can find those interviews online at mountainlake.org. And this week, our guest is the incumbent, Elise Stefanik. And Congresswoman Stefanik joins us. Welcome.
Great to be back here.
So as you're running for a third term now, why don't you talk about a few of your major accomplishments in your first 2 terms?
Sure. So I am so excited to be running on my record of results, and that's a stark contrast with my opponent who's running on resistance. One of my proudest results is leading the New York delegation on a bipartisan basis to save Fort Drum. As you remember, Tom, Fort Drum was facing significant cuts because of defense sequestration, and Fort Drum is the largest economic driver, largest single site employer in this district. So the fact that we were able to fight back against those cuts, that's significant. I also am excited about our economic improvements in the district, fighting for jobs and manufacturers, as well as making sure that our students have the educational tools they need to fulfill those jobs. If you look at the unemployment rates in each of the counties that I represent, unemployment has actually gone down in each of the 12 counties since I've taken office. Wages are up in each of the 12 counties, and I continue to focus on U.S.-Canadian trade, and I think the update of NAFTA, which is so historic and has such an impact on this district, that's great news for our economy, for our manufacturers, and for North Country farmers. So those are all examples of bipartisan victories and results for our region.
And we'll talk a little more about NAFTA and the economy. If you're elected to a third term, what's your top priority?
So I think continuing to focus on agriculture and job creation is going to be really important for a district like mine, particularly for North Country farmers, whether it's seasonal, for example, apple orchards, or whether it's year-round like dairy. They've gone through a crisis over the past few years. Dairy, we're hopeful with the updated NAFTA that they have greater access, obviously, to Canada, so that will help address the low milk prices. But I also think we need to update our labor workforce when it comes to agricultural. Year-round labor for dairy farms and seasonal workers, the H-2A visa program, which isn't working and there's lots of delays. And I also want to continue to focus on jobs in our region. We need to continue promoting this region, promoting tourism, promoting U.S.-Canadian trade, making sure that our border policy understands our partnership with Canada.
And talking about jobs, the economy's doing great. Unemployment's near a record low. The stock market is setting records. Is it happening here in the North Country? Is the North Country seeing a lot of the economic benefits that other parts of the country are seeing?
You know, I think we are, especially compared to when I first took office. One of the challenges we have in New York State is we are a very high tax state. We're not competitive in terms of starting a business or raising a family here. And I think a lot of that has to do with Governor Cuomo's failed policies in Albany. My opponent is funded by Governor Cuomo. This is a stark contrast in how we're approaching this. I do think we are seeing economic growth. And what I've tried to focus on is working with the specific small businesses, employers, and manufacturers to address their concerns. So in this region, for example, working with Bombardier and Novabus to make sure they have what they need in terms of an infrastructure bill, in terms of that certainty when it comes to our highway funding. Working with the medical device manufacturers, which are big employers in this district, like AngioDynamics and C.R. Bard. I led the effort to repeal the medical device tax. That relates to jobs and protecting good-paying jobs in our district. But we can always do more, and I think we should continue to focus on the economy.
Are people better off?
I think people are better off. As I said, wages are up across this district. Unfortunately, we're still losing population, and I think that has to do with the failed leadership of the state and how uncompetitive we are. I've been critical of the governor's policies in terms of pushing his mandates onto the counties, how that ties into our taxes here, and why it's tough for families and small businesses to stay in New York. But I think working with the president, the country is better off. Our economy is doing very well. Unemployment is lower, frankly, than it's ever been in my lifetime. You can't get as low unemployment unless you go back to the 1960s. I was born in the mid-1980s, so it's very exciting. And I think we're going through a transition into what a 21st century workforce looks like and making sure that our education actually is a pipeline for those jobs.
And should President Trump get credit for that?
I think he does deserve credit. Every president is responsible for economic indicators and economic results, and I think this president has earned high marks when it comes to growing the economy, when it comes to addressing unemployment, when it comes to wages.
Do you think this election is going to be a referendum on Donald Trump?
I think in some ways it will be in response to President Trump's success, but I also hope it's a response to Congress's success. There's a lot of focus in the media on sometimes the infighting and gridlock, but if you actually look at it, 80% of the bills we've passed are bipartisan. We've reformed the VA system. We've provided continuity in terms of government funding, updated trade deals, invested in our military. That was something that was a big challenge under the Obama administration. And on a local level, I'm very excited that my results are very localized, whether it's funding the Lake Champlain Basin program, whether it's leading on countering invasive species. So that's exciting, and we're getting a lot of support across party lines.
You said you have had differences with the president. You sometimes don't like what he says or he tweets, but you support him.
I do. I voted for President Trump. I will stand up when I disagree. There are policies that I've disagreed with, as well as rhetoric that I've disagreed with. I think we need to do more to encourage young women to run for office. I've been very focused on that. I think it's exciting in our race that we have 3 women who are running for Congress. That's historic for this district, and probably one of the only districts in the country where we have 3 congressional candidates in one race. I disagreed with the president on his Muslim ban, for example. I don't think we should have a religious litmus test as a part of our immigration system. And I disagreed with provisions in the tax plan that didn't take into account how high taxed we are in New York State, not preserving the state and local tax deduction.
You voted against his tax bill.
I did. That's an example of being independent and standing up for New York, standing up for the North Country in Congress.
But what would you say to the critics who say you haven't spoken out forcibly enough in opposition to the president when he sends offensive tweets, or last week when he mimicked Dr. Blasey Ford at that rally? They say by not being more outspoken, you and other Republicans are in a way justifying his behavior.
Sure. So in terms of his statement regarding Dr. Ford, I did speak out and say that that was inappropriate and unacceptable. And I will continue to speak out when I disagree with the president. But on policies that are important for this district deserves a representative that will work with the president of either party, that will work with their colleagues of either party. And that's why I have one of the top 10% most bipartisan records in Congress.
Brett Kavanaugh was sworn in and seated this week on the Supreme Court. The president this week now says that the accusations by Dr. Blasey Ford were, in his words, a hoax. Some of your Republican colleagues have put out statements after Judge Kavanaugh was confirmed, condemning Democrats for what they call a despicable smear campaign and character assassination in trying to derail the nomination. Do you share those sentiments?
I share the sentiments of Susan Collins. I am not in the Senate. I am not privy to the FBI investigation, but I respect my Senate colleagues for being thoughtful in their advise and consent role. I was very concerned about how politicized the process was. I think there were process fouls that were significant. I think Senator Feinstein should have turned over the information to her colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee so that this could have been addressed as part of the initial FBI investigation. I was appreciative and I supported the additional FBI investigation. This would be the 7th FBI investigation that Justice Kavanaugh has undergone. I certainly don't support impeaching Justice Kavanaugh. I think this is a chapter of American history and history of the Senate that was highly politicized, highly partisan, and a broken process. And I hope they update the process and the rules of how senators conduct themselves, in the sense that if you have information, you're required to turn it over to the bipartisan investigators that are part of the Senate Judiciary Committee that work with both parties.
Do you believe that Brett Kavanaugh belongs on the Supreme Court?
I do.
Do you believe Dr. Blasey Ford and her testimony that he sexually assaulted her?
I think she was very credible. I think she is a victim of sexual assault. I agree with Senator Collins that I do not believe that Justice Kavanaugh was the assailant.
Did his demeanor before the Senate Judiciary Committee raise questions for you about his partisanship or his competency as a judge, his impartiality?
So I think if you look at Justice Kavanaugh's record, he has a very strong record of being apolitical in his role on the D.C. Circuit. And I was pleased in his event at the White House, he said that he intends to be a very apolitical justice, and that's important. So I support Justice Kavanaugh. I think the process was broken. I think there were very partisan political attacks, and I do not think we should impeach Justice Kavanaugh.
NAFTA, do you applaud the deal?
I do. This is a big, big win for our region. It's something that the president has talked about, and I was very concerned about utilizing tariffs as a negotiating tool and the negative impact that's had on the district. That's an example where I've spoken out against the president, but I do think the fact that we have a three-country agreement that's updated, that expands access for our dairy farmers, that's a third rail in Canadian politics. So the fact that they were able to eventually come to the table on that issue, that's a huge benefit for our district. It's a big win for North Country farmers and dairy farmers specifically who have struggled. So I think it's a win, and I think it's a bipartisan win. As you know, Tom, I've led multiple delegations to Canada with the former member Bill Owens, with the North Country Chamber of Commerce, both to Montreal and Ottawa, and there was a lot of fear that we were not going to get ultimately to an updated NAFTA, and there was a lot of fear that this agreement would be ripped up. That would have very negative impacts on our region.
Is the vote a year and a half ago for the American Health Care Act, is that the most significant vote you've ever taken?
I've taken a lot of significant votes in Congress. I think that was a significant vote. I think fully funding the military is a significant vote that I've taken. Every vote has an impact on people I represent, so I'm very thoughtful about every vote. Obviously, there are people who have very strong positions on Obamacare, or they don't like Obamacare, and I continue to hear that in this district. I continue to hear from constituents who are seeing their health care costs increase, their premiums go up. There was recently a study that came out, if you compare 2008 premiums, which were on average a little over $300, to today, which is on average $1,200, that shows how much health care costs have gone up. So we have a broken health care system. While that failed in the Senate, I've been very proud to have some of the largest bipartisan fixes to the Affordable Care Act to update Obamacare.
The medical device tax passed the House, but it hasn't gone anywhere in the Senate.
So we successfully suspended the medical device tax, so delayed it, which is really important. I stand for a full repeal of the medical device tax. That has caused healthcare costs to increase, but it's also important for jobs in this district. The biggest fix to Obamacare that was actually signed into law by President Obama is the repeal of the auto enrollment mandate, which is a bill I introduced. We also voted to repeal the health insurance tax. But I also am very excited about solutions moving forward. I'm a big supporter of associated health plans, allowing small businesses to pool together to increase their purchasing power, giving people greater flexibility to purchase healthcare plans across state lines, focusing on community health centers. I led the effort to reauthorize the community health center funding, which is significant in this district, given the number of community health centers.
Your most vocal critics, though, will say that given Medicaid, the stop of the growth of the program in 2020, that people who are getting coverage now may very well lose that coverage. They said tens of thousands of people could end up losing their coverage or have to pay a lot more, including people they worry who have pre-existing conditions.
So we should absolutely cover everyone with pre-existing conditions. When it comes to the Medicaid expansion discussion, as you know, in Congress there was a divide among my colleagues. Some people wanted to end the Medicaid expansion immediately. I disagreed with that. I think from a state like New York, which has chosen to expand Medicaid, we need to ensure that there is an adequate approach and safety net and funding that meets the needs of that population. So I do not support pulling the rug out from under. I think there needs to be a ramp down approach to modernize our Medicaid system. New York pays more per Medicaid than any other state in the country. And I think we can make sure that we're addressing waste, fraud, and abuse. We can make sure that we're providing the best quality care by also cutting costs and making sure that every dollar goes directly to providing that health care.
Are you doing any second guessing of the campaign? You've run it at all at this point. Some of the TV ads went negative pretty early. You've been called out for some of the claims in those ads on the number of tax increases that Tedra Cobb actually voted for. Do you stand by the ads?
I do stand by the ads. This is a really important contrast in this race. My opponent has voted multiple times for tax increases.
Many refer to you as a rising star within the Republican Party. Where do you see yourself in the next few years? Will you seek a leadership position? Would you ever look to follow in the footsteps of your mentor, Paul Ryan? Would you ever consider a run for this U.S. Senate or governor?
This is a hard job, being a member of Congress, and this is a big district, so I'm very committed to doing this job. I have been approached to run for leadership. I am not interested in running for leadership in the House. I think it's important to have to really focus on my district and to have an independent record, and that's what I'm most proud of, my perception, if you will, that I do have an independent record, that I'm willing to be bipartisan, and I lead by being bipartisan. And I also stand up when I think that members of my own party are not taking the right position. So I appreciate being viewed as a rising star. I'm glad that I'm bringing some youthful energy to this job and to Congress, where the average age is 60. And I hope more young people step up and run for office and challenge their own party.